Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. I'm Jack Chew. This is Chewing It Over, and we come to you live at 12:30 till 1 o'clock on weekdays, and we talk about whatever is topical, usually in the world of MSK, healthcare, education. Those are the things that I'm most passionate about, but occasionally we bring you some stuff about current affairs, which is what happened yesterday. Me and Sandy Hilton talked about the US election, and we've got another show next week talking about that from the right of politics. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into that again. But today we were meant to have Brad Neal joining me to talk about threshold concepts. What are the foundational things that you need to have competence in MSK practice? And we're going to discuss that. But unfortunately, guys, his daughter's school's had a bit of a COVID outbreak, and so he's homeschooling, and she's got a class on at 12:30 that they need to share a laptop for. So he's unfortunately going to have to rain check on this, and so you're stuck with me instead. But I can assure you we will make that show happen. As per usual, I'm always paranoid that I'm not coming through loud and clear, and that we've had some technical issues with signal at the start of a few shows. So please do let me know if you're joining us live. I can see a few of you are there watching. But yeah, thanks to those that tune in after the fact as well. We've had people in their commutes. I notice a spike in downloads that occur for people's commute, either back from work or the following morning. Similarly, across social media, it's good for us to be able to get this out on all of our social media channels on video, but then also it's available wherever you listen to podcasts. And yeah, we've had some great guests on already, but we've also got some plenty of good stuff coming up. Today, what I wanted to talk to you about is sort of, as I've done before when I've done these things solo, is that there's three topics that I feel are hot at the moment, especially that I've noticed on social media even this morning, that I feel like I want to give my take on. So please do let me know your thoughts as we go along on this. Thank you so much to those that are letting me know that you can hear me loud and clear. Thanks, Claire and Becky. Now, Becky, I don't know if you've heard about this, and so forgive me if this is the first you're hearing about it, but I did accidentally call you Betty the other day when discussing the Massage Matters podcast. And so thank you, Betty cum Becky, for giving me that feedback. I probably shouldn't have mentioned that now that you've done me a favor, but unfortunately, yes, I did call you Betty yesterday. Now, the three topics I want to talk to you about today, and that I'm keen to hear your thoughts on straight out the gates, is that there was something that was discussed this morning about some myths and misconceptions that can get then perpetuated in and around race and pain, and the notion that, particularly the one that's most pervasive, is that South Asian, and often it's said South Asian women have a high susceptibility to pain, and that people then pass that out of certain bits of data. And of course, you've then got people that are ignorantly not recognizing what, you know, they're making assumptions based on some data, and then you've got some people that are just, you know, going to be outright racist, that are then inferring that there's some sort of inferiority that can occur that would make that happen. And so when those myths get perpetuated, they can be really damaging and upsetting in many ways. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but definitely not in as much detail as we will in future shows, because we're going to have a guest on to talk about that who's an expert in those sorts of matters. But I'll just give my sort of take on that and why we need to make sure that we nip that in the bud, and how best I think to do that. Then there's going to be a little chat about why the ACP, APP, FCP acronym jargon about advanced practice constantly keeps doing laps on social media, and why it's super important and people get really passionate about it. Haduzo on the show talking a little bit about that, and he's sort of fired things up again the other day. We have an event, an MSKR event for our birthday tomorrow. So tomorrow evening, we're going to be closing that tonight. Tickets are nearly done and sold out for that. So if you haven't already, then check out MSKR's event on FCP and APP. Got an incredible panel lined up to discuss that, as well as a few ideas as to how MSKR feels it can contribute to that conversation. But I want to talk a little bit in a second about why does that keep coming back around, and why is it particularly important? And then a little further to physios as prescribers and medication. We had Pip White on the show earlier this week, and I think it's useful for us to sort of mention that the consultation that's occurring is not fraught with challenges, and also there's people that are going to wanting to offer a counter narrative to the one in which me and Pip shared the other day. And so I want to give that the time of day and talk a little bit about that as well. But first, I'm going to close the comments off in a second, not shut you down. You can comment, of course, but I'm just going to keep it out of my vision for a second. But I want your take on these matters. Do you hear about certain myths and misconceptions, or are you even susceptible, or feel like you've understood the data to be a certain way with regards to the link between race and pain, ethnicity and pain, and what that means, and what you feel that might mean, and what people have maybe told you it is, or if you've heard those things being mentioned? Similarly, if you've got any sort of take on the advanced practice debacle, and whether you're, I'm interested, I suppose, if whether you're frustrated about that constantly coming right around, whether you think it's an important topic, or whether you think it's something that people are just wanting to flog a dead horse on and you want people to move on, then please let me know. And similarly, the final thing is, do you have any opinions on whether physio should be prescribers, and if so, what they are to prescribe? So yeah, I'm not going to close the comments, sorry, I'm just going to hide them from view for a few minutes, but please do share your thoughts on today's topics, especially if you're only joining us for a few minutes. Throw it out there and then leave it be, but I'm interested in your thoughts, especially as I'm going to riff on those topics. But yes, seems that Betty has heard, and it's going to stick. So sorry about that, Betty, mid-ear. Right, let me close these off for a second, and please do get us your comments in about those topics. First and foremost, then, the CSPs. BAME, I think it's the BAME network actually shared it, and then Jita sort of tagged me in just to say, like, can we get your take on this matter? How do we stop these myths spreading? It was this notion that a student or a therapist had been told by a senior about the fact that, as in quite a matter-of-fact way, South Asians are more susceptible to pain, or report more pain, or more sensitive to pain. I can't remember exactly what it was, and it's something that I've heard in various different contexts before, and there's a reason for that being perpetuated, and so they were saying, how do we rid, stop these sorts of myths getting spread? And it's a really interesting point. Now, one of the things that's happened is you've got group level characteristics, which is fraught with a challenge anyway. So you've got this potential category error about trying to group people by race and ethnicity, when fundamentally it's something that is known to be biologically of very little relevance at all, especially on general characteristics. And so you're then in this situation whereby, based on, say, ticking a box on a survey when people are doing research collection, they're then doing a set of tests and then making sometimes an inference. So for example, then you've got, you're ticking certain boxes by ethnicity, etc. And then you're then having some laboratory measures in which you're then trying to work out pain thresholds, or various different pain reporting outcomes even. So it's kind of VAS scores or other outcome measures. And then in various different studies, you might find at different levels, you've got group characteristics that can then correlate to, say, higher VAS scores, or pass or fail on certain tests, or whatever it might be. I don't need to be specific in this moment, because it's more that is why that can occur in any given scientific experiment, right? You've created some categories, you've then done some sort of test or asked some questions, and then you're then parsing that data. Now, let's say for some reason, in some examples, you've got a group characteristic or trait that you've kind of found a way to categorize often. You've then done a test, be that in the laboratory setting, meaning that you've not necessarily gone about any subjective measures of sort of tidying that up. And then you find that you might be able to correlate something with something, right? In this instance, there's been examples that get given whereby, say, South Asian heritage or background might be something that's sort of ticked on a form or identified in some way by the participant. And then despite various different blinding and within trials, they then might say report higher VAS or what have you in there. This is where it gets interesting, because there's a category error sometimes with regards to where you put those barriers up, right? Where you put the containment over the category. Then you've got certain, variety of different things that you might have tested or measured, which can be of differing reliability, and also different levels of cultural sensitivity. Or a good example in this instance is, you're asking a VAS, there are certain cultural backgrounds or certain linguistic challenges with regards to how relevant it is to rate a pain score out of with numbers, right? I know it's fraught with challenges with pretty much every patient that you're trying to give them. Sometimes they really struggle to want to put a number to it, and then in other cultural circumstances, it's absolutely foreign, for want of a better term, a concept, and it's fraught with those challenges. Even when you mark it on a line, VASing a score of pain is fraught with challenges anyway. So there's an unreliability there, especially it's not culturally sensitive. And then you get this data, right? And so let's say that it does show something like that. This is where a really clumsy inference comes in that then becomes something that perpetuates a racist trope. It then is sort of an inference that the relevant variable that might be affecting a difference between group level characteristics, whatever they are, in, say, pain susceptibility or sensitivity, or even just reporting, is then an inference then that if you're reporting higher pain scores, it's like there's some sort of biological relevance to that, as if it's sort of, and then of course the extension to it is that there's a biological inferiority between racial categories, ethnicities, etc., that then means that, well, that's what you'd expect. And it's almost like that racist trope of sort of supremacy of different characteristics and traits that can be then suggested from that data. When, of course, even when that data, let's imagine that, give it the benefit of the doubt, which it doesn't deserve, but imagine that data is credible in every which way and has been appropriately gathered using reliable metrics, then you get these population level group data differences. But there's a whole host of different factors that are going to be affecting that with regards to the biopsychosocial variables that are influencing it. And we know that the biological identifiers that differentiate categories of ethnicity and race are incredibly irrelevant relative to the sociological and other factors that can affect it, as well as then the crude measures of what we're meaning by pain measure. We know pain to be a much more complex phenomena than we used to, and therefore, let's not pretend that there isn't, on every level of analysis, that's fraught with challenges. So to make a conclusion, especially one that's going to be so contentious, and rightly so, that's where it becomes a problem. Now, I said I won't go into much more detail on that because I'm certainly not a specialist in this area, but that's how I understand it being. I can see the myths getting perpetuated by some people that are, it's a misreading of data. And then I also see some people that, I don't know, and they're certainly not friends of mine, but it's kind of, you can see why that data would be leveraged as an inference of inferiority or superiority of different characteristics, which is where it gets really ugly, of course. But as I say, we're going to definitely go into this in more detail with specialists that can talk about this and what that data does and doesn't mean and what we can understand of it. But the reason these things can get perpetuated and what you need to do, and the reason I'm wanting to unpack this now, because I only noticed it this morning, but I'm telling you my take on it now, is because when you notice these things, there's two things that can get made. One is that you just ignore it and sort of like cringe and think, oh, that's just a bit of a racist idiot that's making that mistake. That's one mistake, I think. Sort of silence in that regard is really clumsy. At least be asking questions just to try and see if there's any sort of nuance that can be lifted from it, or whether someone is genuinely misunderstanding. And then the second thing is that you can sometimes then be, and I understand this sentiment, but wanted to just dismiss that out of hand as if the numbers don't exist, right? They are just hateful facts and hateful numbers, and therefore they just need to be dismissed out of hand. When, as I described before, if you give the benefit of the doubt to some of that, then it could well be that there are group level characteristics that you can correlate together. That doesn't necessarily infer causation, and it certainly doesn't then mean that there's a narrow thing that you can conclude from that would make any relevant suggestion of racial biases in that data. So that's kind of what I'm meaning, is you don't want to make either of those mistakes, even though I can understand why people want to just sort of poo-poo it. And it means that if you're going to talk about it, you want to talk about it sensibly. And that's why, forgive me if I've made some mistakes here, giving my sort of take on it, but we're definitely going to get some experts on to pass that out, because it's important that we can accurately and take a scalpel as well as a sledgehammer to those sorts of myths and make sure we can get them out of not just society, but also the care professions, right? It's not a caring thing to do to be so clumsy about sensitive things like that, especially when it's absolute nonsense. Especially if you're going to use something like that to factor into your clinical reasoning, you're going to go down some really dark rabbit warrens there, I think. So that's my take on that. I don't know if anyone's weighed in on it at all, and whether or not they feel that is something relevant. Forgive me if I have heard it made any mistakes in that direction, but also I really welcome that discussion and certainly on future shows. But that's a frustration that I've noticed, and it's certainly one that I was pleased to be tagged in. I think it's something that's important for us to talk about, because, yeah, if someone dismisses it out of hand and then infers that the data doesn't exist, it's kind of equivalent to putting your fingers in your ears. But then similarly, if you're thinking that that's telling you something that it isn't, then you can go down some really dark nooks and crannies, I would say. So yeah, thank you so much for Vegeta for tagging me in that, and some really interesting discussions that were occurring, and we'll definitely be doing more podcasts about that, because it's interesting, especially when you think about what COVID's brought and the ethnic and racial disparities, say in COVID, especially deaths and major illnesses and stuff, and the socioeconomic things that can sometimes tell us, and all sorts of interesting discussions that can have about shielding, etc., that occurred. So we'll talk about that again. Second thing is that I said I wanted to talk about today, to chew over, was that every few days, and maybe I'm one of the people that stirs this up, but a hot topic that continues to do laps is the advanced practice come first contact style discussion about what MSK therapists, and particularly, this is a bit of a physiocentric conversation sometimes, about how people aspiring into quite diagnostic triage related roles. There's a fantastic piece of work that's just been done, basically giving a roadmap to how to accredit and credential advanced practice and how first contact practice fits into that, etc. Which is why I think these things are sort of on the tip of everyone's tongue. But at the heart of what happens on social media is, and I'm certainly one of these that are massive advocates for us to not get blinkered into thinking that the advanced skills that are often almost technician based, like imaging requisition, which of course is a skill, and imaging interpretation, even higher level skill, prescriptions, and which I'll come to, of course, later in a different context, but injections, there's a skill to it, and especially needs to be done appropriately and safely. And I'm someone that advocates for the fact that MSK therapists, and namely physiotherapists, can do that and should aspire to have those skills if it's appropriate for the service or for your needs or for your practice or what have you. However, it shouldn't be at the expense of some core rehab skill. And I don't necessarily just mean in individuals now, but your MSK service, be that private or NHS, is only as strong as your rehab services. And I said on Twitter last night, that is where the sausage is made, right? It can be warts and all, it can be ugly, it can need plan B, A, B, C, but it's something that realistically, the scaling someone's function, I'm always doing this and I'm always using my hands, right? Scaling someone's function from where they are to where they want to get to, and helping them build and climb and fall down that ladder that goes between those 2 points is the juice, right? That is exactly what quality MSK care is. And so if that isn't being done by the best and brightest, if people are aspiring away from that for various reasons, financial gain, etc., and I don't mean it in a narrow, self-interested way, I just mean the fact that they hit a barrier where they're sort of in a band 6 role, say in the NHS, in which that's where the rehab is done, and the only way for them to aspire to appropriate remuneration in pay, as well as other opportunities for leadership, as well as other varying their roles, so they're not just in the grind of back-to-back patients all the time, especially on shorter and shorter timeframes, then that is where they will need to go and sometimes be tempted into, say, a quite isolated FCP role in a GP practice, or they go into advanced practice and do an injection qualification, or want to aspire to wear a shirt rather than a polo shirt. It's the sort of classic physio trope there. And as someone, I'm someone that worked as an extended scope practitioner, as an advanced practice physio, but I traveled 90 minutes each way on a part-time basis alongside my other work that I was doing here and elsewhere, to a service in Staffordshire, because it was integrated, because I was able to engage in rehab, and that even if I was to hand that to another therapist, I was involved and held accountable to my referrals. I was also able to engage with that in shared assessments. I was also privy to the educational processes that were occurring in that team in various denominations, from support worker 5, 6, 7. And so integrated services is the way forward, and I see those separations being a big part of the problem. But the reason, to speak to the title of what I was saying I was going to talk about today, is that the reason why it keeps coming back around is because it's hot at the moment, because we're talking a lot about advanced practice, and rightly so, because there's been some great work about, if we're going to do it, let's do it well, let's actually appropriately accredit it and make it worthwhile, understand how that should be remunerated so that there can't be a race to the bottom. Great. And then there's the fact that people then, as soon as that chatter is occurring, then they're concerned about trying to make sure we don't end up with this brain drain away from where the core product is, the core, where the evidence is pointing, which is this scaled functional rehab, which obviously I'm really passionate about. And so that's why it keeps coming around. And people like Uzo are just fantastic at throwing those grenades intermittently. And if you're interested in that, and you're also interested in the solutions to it that are multifaceted, then join us tomorrow, because MSKR, it's exactly what we love to do. And we're talking about and thinking in public about it tomorrow in a fantastic panel that Matt Wyatt is leading as our Associate Director for Clinical Excellence. So please do join us tomorrow night and get involved in that. And I'm going to be listening and reflecting, and I'm not preparing my final remarks, because I'm going to just try and listen as closely as I can, and then think about how we as an organization can help to move the needle in the right direction and support our members and other wider community within MSKR to try and help to create the right noises and to move policy in the right direction, which is what, as a think tank, we're responsible for. So that's why I think it keeps coming back around. I'm interested in your thoughts as to whether or not you think this is something that, is it annoying that, I suppose, is it annoying that it keeps coming back around, or do you think it does so because it's important? I'm interested in your sort of thoughts on that for sure. I've got a comment here. I don't know. So sorry, I lose track of time because I hide the comments from my view because I'm so easily distracted. But and I'm going to struggle with your name as well. It's a lovely Welsh name. Would that be Ree short for Rhiannon, perhaps? Llewellyn? I love that lovely name. She said, yes, that's me. And a bit more unpacked here. I've only gone for FCP, etc., because there was no career progression in MSK. It just breaks my heart. You've no idea. No idea, Ree. Honestly, if you're up for it, and you're willing to share that story, you know, it doesn't need to be warts and all, and we can not name names, etc. But if you're willing to share that story, then please, you're exactly who I want to have on the show and sort of talk through that, because I've got so much sympathy for the fact that people have been drawn in that direction and have had to turn their back on something that they're actually quite passionate about, because otherwise they've hit a ceiling, and we lose some great clinicians that way. Similarly, that, you know, just love it if you're willing to share that, be that on a show, or even if you just send me some messages, and I can recount that story anonymized, of course, if you'd rather. Katie has said, and this is definitely, I need further knowledge on this, so a podcast would be good. I wonder if that's maybe first topic, Katie. You'll have to let me know if that was about the sort of race and pain thing. That I'd love to. Obviously, we're going to unpack far more in another show with actual experts as well. Laura Stewart has said, I was aware that the race and pain misconceptions were a thing, but again, I'd assumed it was a more historical issue, not a current one. It's sad to hear. A bit like, oh, sorry, it shifted there because Katie got back in touch. A bit like that idea that kids don't feel as much pain. Yeah, you get this. It's funny, isn't it? Like what we need to, you need a mature analysis of understanding what pain is to realize just how fraught some of those myths and misconceptions can be. Because as soon as you know that, the kids thing's a great example, whereby as soon as you can recognize that, you've got to, you're asking kids about pain, to get them to rate it, get them to measure it, etc., getting them to understand it. You know, it's something that as soon as we recognize how complex pain is, we realize just how fraught some of those measures are. And you imagine that then the inferences that people make when they're sort of doing correlation analysis in groups, and the dark side of that when it comes to things like race, then you can understand just how those mistakes get made somewhat innocently, but then there's also some malicious stuff there for those that perpetuate those or think that they're an especially relevant data point. You know, that's the thing that, or should be deeply influential to your reasoning when you're treating any individual, right? So it's just, you know, that's where it gets really, really murky, and something we need to shine a light on in order to rid it, because the accurate analysis of it is something that it shouldn't be nearly as relevant as some people suggest it is. And unfortunately, yes, it is still out there clearly, and an experience that someone has had whereby it's been brought to them and they've needed to bring that up with the CSP's BAME network, and so, you know, it's important sometimes that these anecdotes come forward, because we can see that it's not relegated to history, unfortunately. Katie's then clarified. She said that core skills are vital, always need discussion. Patients suffer if rehab is not addressed. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, I don't think we could talk too much ever about this topic, right? I just think it's super important, and so I'm fascinated sometimes that people, I imagine there's going to be some people out there, maybe not on this show, that are just feeling frustrated that it comes back around. I think that sometimes it can be a bit repetitive, but I understand why, and we need to be more persistent with it. I think we can be politically savvy in thinking that we need to repeat certain things, but I genuinely really want to understand what is going on when people are advocating for advanced practice roles that aren't well integrated, and that we need to be clear that you can do something in theory and promote something in theory, but in practice it's only as good as the integration and the actual rehab service that surrounds it. And that's one of the things that really concerns me, is that you kind of you don't get that balance right, and if we miss that opportunity, then we're really going to well, I mean, be curtains, absolute curtains for the profession, especially in the NHS, of which I'm incredibly passionate about. He says sat in his private practice, of course, but a long history working within the NHS, and somewhat reluctantly then got squeezed out of it in many ways, just by many plates I was spinning and family, etc., for travel. But it's kind of that, you imagine that the MSK services in the NHS are slower to come back online to face to face, back online, sorry, back face to face, up to speed after COVID, especially after this second wave. And then you're in this situation where people either aspire into those sorts of triage and advanced practice roles, of which some services and some trusts are finding to be of the higher value, they're bigger cash cow, say, then they're going to leave for private practice. If your private practices are going to be seeing patients face to face, and seeing the patients that have otherwise had to pay for taxation funded healthcare, and then have to seek help for MSK elsewhere, is really concerning to me, because we need a really robust, decent public sector, and people deserve that, and people deserve quality functional rehab, and so it's a massive concern, and we need to get on top of it ASAP. Really important. Got a couple more comments here. Jeanette Lewis, thank you so much, Jeanette, for saying that she loves the rehab sausage analogy. Yeah, exactly. Rehab is where the sausage is made when it comes to physio. Yeah, it's a bit of a, sometimes we don't want to look at it. That's the thing with the sausage is made analogy, but exercise should be prescribed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it shouldn't be a given. It should be at the heart of what we do. And yeah, absolutely. I'm saying, does it always go round and round, or do we keep going on about it, or do the ponderings keep doing lapses? Because it comes back around because it's a problem that hasn't been sorted. Absolutely. You think about, honestly, I'm going to try, and if we can get round to it, get some clips of some old Physio Matters podcast episodes from years ago, whereby we're sort of floating some of these early concerns that are then still at the heart of my core questions, and it's sort of painful. And I think a failing of me and team, as much as anything. I think we've had many different avenues we've been fighting, and potentially we've been responsible for not being strong enough activists in that space that now it's still unfortunately perpetuating. Danielle Chilan, formerly Brailsford, for those that know. She is saying that I see a fear of getting it wrong, or a bit of in denial overriding processes of challenging personal conscious and unconscious bias. I imagine that is relevant to the first part of the conversation about race and pain, and I think that is the case, is that people, a fear of getting it wrong means that people will stay silent in face of myths, or they will also sometimes be, a fear of getting it wrong means that they are then make the mistake of being completely dismissive of the numbers, as if to suggest that you have to create an inference that the numbers are completely false in order for that to it's kind of, and by dismissing that, then you sort of sweeping certain things under the carpet, and they're likely to bounce back. I'm mixing my metaphors now, but I really agree with Danielle there. Absolutely, is that sometimes people's fear of getting it wrong means that they make one or both of those mistakes. They end up being silent or indulging it, or they're sometimes clumsy in the way that they dismiss it and don't actually squash it properly and accurately as we need to. So I am. Let's have a look. What's Joe? Joe said, "Good bit of physio guilt there." Yes, Joe, absolutely. Yeah, I've got some guilt in that direction, because that's the thing. I'm nervous. If I was to show clips of us making the same noises years ago, there's no benefit to any sort of "I told you so" if that ship does go down. And so, I mean, I like a second comment. She says, "I've been trying pretty hard." I have, but so you wonder, don't you? Is that us talking about the minutiae of exactly how to load a tendon, or how much we should use our hands for manual therapy is an exercise that's only good if there's a industry in which we can deliver that care. That's the thing that I feel guilty about, and why I wonder if I should have done more in this space. Is if it all falls to the ground, then the time that we've spent on the detail of certain conditions or pathologies or styles of practice, etc., will have been more redundant, when on a policy level, I was always knowing that this was the fight of our time. And so that's the thing that I feel guilty about, is that maybe it was a misprioritizing for me and team to have spread our bets in many ways and talked about whatever we find topical and interesting, etc. When this, I think, is a really key area that we need to sort out. Thank you to Laura for another comment here that won't show all on screen. Let me try and get the gist of it. She's saying that as a pain specialist, she'd fit more into therapeutic category rather than diagnostic. No way that she could keep the level of detail at an advanced level to keep it all at once. That is a really fantastic point, and I think that it's a bit of a hidden gem there. I think from Laura is that you've got a number of ways in which people don't accept how spread thin someone must be in terms of skill set. They would be such a generalist because they're never going to be able to keep up with best practice for every single body part, and that's what's fascinating, is that you kind of you're not going to be able to be as focused, and therefore if everyone was doing that, if everyone's being the overseer, overviewer, that sort of thing, and triaging, or even if they're going into pain roles and only seeing persistent pain, and then someone comes in with complex ankle sprain of which something's occurred, which needs some real specific rehab, then who's there? Who's going to do that? Who's going to make the sausage, as I talked about earlier? So we're out of time because I've waffled on there. Hopefully I've pulled a fair few of your comments up there. Sorry if I missed anyone. Thank you so much. Do keep your comments coming. Of course, they it doesn't close, so you can make those after the fact if you're reaching this not live. Also, it's available on podcasts, podcast players. Got a great show planned for you tomorrow, and all being well, I've got some exciting final announcements for some of the superstar athletes that are going to be joining us at Therapy Live Sport. If you haven't got your ticket for that, then do so quickly, because yes, certainly it's going to sell out within days, if not certainly next week. And so yeah, we're quite excited. We held back 1,000 tickets, and so it's the final countdown for those to go. But yeah, we've got, I think, let's say 7 Olympic gold medals and 2 World Triathlon Series wins amongst the athletes that that are joining us across panels. Put it this way, we're into co-creation between therapists, coaches, and patients. And the patients within a sporting environment are often athletes. And so we've got athletes across the program. It makes sense. We want their experience to come forward and for them to give a take as to how they're managed and treated and how they can aspire to be their best and get better once they're injured. So we've got a massive amount of high profile athletes of various different stripes and flavors littered across the Therapy Live Sport program. So incredibly excited. And on Saturday, yeah, it's the 2-week klaxon for that, and everything's getting polished and preened. And yeah, you're gonna be in for a treat. So get your tickets for that as well. But also, I'll join you. Please do join us tomorrow if you're interested in that advanced practice rehab side. Loads of really interactive features. We're going to be using the Therapy Live platform for that, and therefore you're going to be able to, comments, questions, voting on other people's questions and stuff, and some exciting birthday announcements for MSKR as we celebrate our first birthday, which has certainly been a very interesting year, let's say. So thank you so much for joining today. Really appreciate you all, and yeah, hopefully, as ever, the outro works and I can love you and leave you. It's all right.